Okay, we're going to do a quick review of moon phases, tides, and seasons. This is for the test that is tomorrow. So I'm going to try to make this really short. There's not a whole lot to this unit. It's pretty basic. It's Earth, Moon, and Sun and how they're related as a system. So right off the bat, I'll just go ahead and draw a sun in the middle. We'll do seasons. Earth is on a tilted axis. It's tilted about 23.5 degrees. And based on that tilt and the revolution of Earth around the Sun, that's what causes seasons. So in this position, we do have Earth. The northern hemisphere is tilted toward the Sun. The southern hemisphere is tilted away from the Sun. So this would be summer in the northern hemisphere, and it would be winter in the southern hemisphere. That means that the next phase, or the next major season as it orbits the Sun, would be here. So looking at this diagram, it's impossible to tell whether this is spring or fall just based on that. So we go back to the previous one. The season after summer would be fall. And the season after would be spring. So the sun focuses on the equator at that time. In the previous one, the sun focused on the Tropic of Cancer. So this was equator. The next one, this Earth would be positioned on the right side. That's kind of a terrible Earth. Redo that. Right side. And we can see the northern hemisphere tilts away, so that would be winter. And the southern hemisphere tilts toward the Sun, and that would be summer. This time the Sun focuses south of the equator on a line called the Tropic of Capricorn. So the southern hemisphere gets more light during that time, so therefore it's hotter. And last but not least, we've got the season after winter, which would be spring for the northern hemisphere. And the season after summer would be fall for the southern hemisphere. So that it takes 365 days for the Earth to make one revolution around the Sun. Earth also, on this equator, Earth also rotates on an axis, and that takes about 24 hours, and the direction is counterclockwise for that as well. So that's pretty much all you need to know for seasons. If the Earth tilts toward the Sun, the axis tilts toward the Sun, it's going to be summer. If it tilts away, it's winter. And then if it's fall or spring, you need to figure out what comes before or after that. So they may not give you the full diagram on a test question. They may give you something that looks like this, which is the Sun and one Earth. And actually they could do the axis the other way, just to be tricky. So the northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere. At this position, the Sun is falling on the equator. So in order to figure out what season that is, we're going to have to either go forward in the revolution or backward in the revolution. So I'll just go forward, just for the sake of showing you guys. So if I was to do that, and then we have winter in the northern hemisphere here, summer in the southern hemisphere here. So that means that the season before winter would be fall in the northern hemisphere. The season before summer would be spring in the southern hemisphere. You have to draw this on your own on a test, especially if they only give you this position. So it's really important that you're able to figure that out on your own and use your test-taking strategies to get to the answer. Other things of interest here, really that's pretty much it. There's not a whole lot to learn with seasons. The misconception is that people think that we're closer to the Sun during the summer, when in actuality we're closest to the Sun in January. So just a little advice. Our longest day occurs during the summer, and shortest day occurs during the winter. So this would be where our short day would be. And over here would be where our longer days would be, since this is our summer. And of course it's reversed for the southern hemisphere. That's that for seasons. Next thing we covered was moon phases. So moon phases are a function of the sun and the earth and the moon. So the moon revolves counterclockwise around Earth. So there are 4 main quarter phases. The total revolution takes 28 days. So each quarter is about 7 days. 7 times 4 is 28. If I was to draw how the sun lights these, it lights the side facing the sun. So about half of the moon is lit at any given time. So this is not how we see it from Earth, it's just how the moon is lit. So if you were to want to figure out how we see it from Earth, you simply figure out what we're looking at. So on this one, we're looking at only the dark side, so that would be it would look like this. That would be a new moon. Over here, we're only looking at the light side. So it would look like that, so that would be a full moon. If we're looking at this one, and you kind of have to turn your head sideways to see it, but it would be a first quarter moon. And if you really don't even have to remember that, as long as you can find new and full, because this is a waxing period. So the light should be on the right, and the dark should be on the left since it's waxing. And over here, then we would have our third quarter moon, which is a waning moon. And the way you know that's because we're going from full to new, so that's a waning period. So really the only other thing you would need to be concerned with is that they could show you different directionality, like the sun here and the earth here versus the sun here, earth here. If that's the case, then the new moon is here. The full moon is here now. And we've got our first quarter right after new. So it goes like that. And we've got our third quarter here. So just draw those real quick. And in between, you just kind of fill in the blanks. It's kind of like A, C, B. So if this one's half lit on the right side, then this one would be slightly less than half lit on the right side. And that's called a waxing. Waxing meaning getting more light, and it's a crescent because it's less than half lit. Over here we've got half lit, so now we've got more than half lit. It's still waxing because it's not full yet. This is a waxing gibbous. Full moon. This would be so now we're past the full moon, so now it begins to get darker. That's called waning. So from here to here, it's waning. So this would be a waning gibbous. Notice that the dark side is on the right because it wanes from right to left. We've got our third quarter. We've got a waning crescent. Waning gibbous. Waning crescent. And back to our new moon. Again, it takes 28 days for the whole cycle. 7 days between quarters. Really, that's pretty much all there is to know about moon phases. We see different amounts of light because it's perspective from Earth. The moon is always half lit, just like we saw here. The only other thing you need to know is tides, and I'm just going to do moon phases over here as well, just for the sake of doing it again. So, tides are caused by the moon's gravitational pull. So wherever the moon is, there's going to be a high tide on that side of Earth and the opposite side of Earth. That means that there are going to be low tides on the other parts of Earth. So knowing that, if the sun and the moon are in line with Earth, it's going to create a stronger than normal gravitational pull. So it's going to make the high tide even higher. And it's going to make the low tide even lower. That's called a spring tide. If the moon is not in line with the sun, if it's at a 90-degree angle in our quarter phases, then that's called a Neap Tide, and that occurs when the high tide is not super high and the low tide is not super low. The reason for that, water from here goes to the high tide, but some of that gets pulled back. Excuse me, I did that backwards. Water from here gets pulled to the high tide, but some of that gets pulled back because of the gravitational pull of the sun. So not as much water leaves this area to form the high tide, so therefore we have less of a low tide. The phases for that would be new moon and full moon for spring tide, new moon and full moon for spring tide, and then our first quarter and our third quarter for the neap tides. If you have any questions or if you need any additional help, please make sure you ask me before the test. I'll have a review session again tomorrow morning, so if you need anything, please let me know. Thanks.